Hello, this is my first instructional video and I'm just showing how I took apart my BenQ HT1075. Probably will apply to several other similar models. But the problem I was having is that the projector would start for and go for about 3 minutes after I replaced the bulb, after the initial bulb had blown up. So I tried replacing the bulb, I tried buying another bulb, replacing with that bulb, none of that worked. So I finally decided that I needed to take it apart and find out what was going on inside. I could see the 3 fans that you can see from the outside were working fine, but there is a blower fan deep inside the projector that if a piece of glass gets stuck in there, then it will overheat in about 3 minutes. So I figured that was probably the problem, because as soon as you would turn it on, you'd have about 3 minutes, and then the temperature light would come on and it would shut off. So here I am removing the bulb housing, and I recorded everything because I was concerned about knowing how to put it back together. So if you're in similar situation, this might be helpful. Also might be helpful if you've taken it apart and don't have an instruction manual for how to put it back together. So first thing I did, take out the bulb housing, then take out a screw right next to the bulb housing, which holds the top cover on. And this is one of several screws. Underneath there are several more screws that hold the top cover on, so you have to take this one out and then turn it over in order to remove here the projector is turned over, and I'm removing each of the screws from the holes with the little arrows pointing at them. I've also got to remove the mount for the ceiling mount. And it's a little bit tricky to get this back cover off because it snaps together. In addition to the screws, there's snaps. So once you get the screws off, it doesn't just instantly fall apart. It takes a little bit of prying. So there's a piece of glass that I found already within the projector, and some of the dust that has come out just from being inside the projector. So I'm going to use a little paintbrush to try to get more of the dust out, a clean paintbrush. So it takes a little prying, as I said. Pry along the sides, carefully finding the little tabs. If you're missing any of the screws, then if you haven't taken out any of the screws, then you could break the cover. So be careful to make sure you get all the screws out. Got that one out. Got all those out. Now we're gonna get the cover off. So there's a couple of places where you can see little tabs that if you push in with the flathead screwdriver gently, it will release the snaps so that you can more easily pull the cover off. So there you've got the cover off, and it comes off all in one piece. You can see that there are places inside with some dust and glass fragments. So now we're going to get to taking the innards apart, because you still can't, even once you get the cover off, you still cannot access the blower motor. So here I'm removing the speaker wire connection and showing which way it plugs back into the circuit board. So you've got to disconnect that before you can take off the circuit board protecting sheet there, and it goes in those little guides. So unplug it and then move it out of the guides. Remember which cable is which. So I'm lining up all the screws and things that I take out in order along a desk so that I know roughly which order the parts came out in. So in order to remove that circuit board cover, you've got to also remove the screws in the back next to the ports. the RCA ports and also the HDMI screws next to the HDMI ports. So once you get all those screws out, plus the screws that are visible on the top of the circuit board protector, you can remove the screws holding the RS-232 ports in place. It's handy to have a little screwdriver that can do this job that's just the right size. You could also use a pair of pliers to get those out. But once those are out, then you can take the back panel off. It also snaps out. And then once that's free, put it in my line of parts. Then you can take off the circuit board protector and set that in the row to go back together later. So now you can see the side panel here. It needs to come off. So it snaps out. Side panel is a little tricky to get unhooked, so be careful not to break the little tab or the little parts that you can see that they slide into little grooves. If you just pull on it, you'll break those, so it lifts up and snaps out. And that's what the little hook looks like that holds it in place. So now here is a fan on the side of the projector, and there's the circuit board. That's the orientation of the circuit board where the screws were in that held the circuit board protector in place. So we've got to disconnect all of the cables and wires that are holding the circuit board in place, because the circuit board has to be removed. So I'm trying to show those carefully so that you can see exactly which way they go in for when you have to put it back together. So I'm going to take the fan out in order to carefully clean it. It's got a lot of dust as the fans process all the air. They collect dust from the air, so they're going to work better if you get the dust off. So we'll continue with getting the different cables disconnected. So careful with the cables. Don't pull on the cable itself. Pull on the little connector, because if you pull on the cables themselves, they will come out and leave the connector there, which actually happened to me on one of them, but I was able to slide the cables back in. On mine, at least, somebody had marked, it was not me that marked them, but they were marked with all of these different cables were marked on the top with what looked like a permanent marker to show which end was up. So here, if you have any trouble connecting your cables back to the circuit board at the end, this allows you to see which way they went in originally, which I had to use while I was disconnecting. So now we've almost got all of the cables disconnected from the circuit board. Have just a couple more. So while I was working on that, getting that cable out, it would not come, and I eventually had to, or ended up accidentally pulling the wires out instead of just the coupler. So I was a little concerned about that, but it ended up that you could press the wires back in just fine at the end. There you go. You can see the wires that got pulled out of the coupler. So that's an oops. You don't want to do that if you can avoid it. Pull the coupler out instead. Makes it a little bit more tricky to put back together. So now we'll proceed and take that little paper connector out. It comes out fairly easily. There's a little card that holds it in place. It's handy that somebody had marked all of these with marker on the top to make sure that they would go back in with the top up. I'm going to remove some more cables. If you gently work on one side and then the other, you can generally get those out pretty easily. I had one that really stuck and wouldn't come out, and that's why the wires ended up coming out. But if you use fingernails and gentle pressure, you can usually get the connector end to come out instead of the wires. So once you've got all the wires disconnected, we can start working on taking the circuit board out. And the circuit board is held with these screws that I'm showing. And the circuit board snaps into place in two different parts. There's a part next to my fingers there, and there's also a part over on the right-hand side, if you're looking from the back, that I'm showing with the pins that snaps up into the circuit board. So it takes a little bit of a straight upwards pull to remove the circuit board. So now this part holds the circuit board in place. We're going to remove that in order to get to the blower fan. There's all the parts in a row to make for easy reassembly. So we'll take the circuit board holding structure out. That's what the screws look like for that. The grounding cable has a special kind of screw that's a little bit different than the other ones. So those two cables go through a little cable holder guardian thing. So you need to take those out because that cable holder clip is going to come out with the circuit board holding structure. Thank you. Now, a couple of these screws for the circuit board holding structure are kind of hidden. So if you lift up on it and it doesn't come out, you've probably missed a screw. So there's a difference between the screw that holds the grounding cable and the other screws. Here I'm showing where the different screws go. And if you look down in there, there's still another screw. It's a little bit hidden. All right, once you get all the screws out, this will lift out. And now you can see the blower motor. So there's a little air port that comes off of the blower motor in order for the blower motor to blow its air directly on the bulb housing. So you've got to remove the port. It's actually in two different parts. When I opened mine, the port was already unsnapped. I think that it's possible when the bulb blew that it unsnapped the port. So there's the bottom half of the port. Looks like it's got some sort of sensor, probably the heat sensor right there on the port. So the blower motor has its housing also. So if you unscrew the screws from the housing, you can take the blower motor and housing out together. There, the blower motor and housing come out together. And when the blower motor first came out, I could hear the rattle of glass inside. And when I would try to move the blades of the blower motor with my finger, it would not move. I was looking through the fins of the vents, or of the heat sinks there, looking for other pieces of glass. Didn't find any. But there you can see that the tines will not move all the way around. So you could hear the glass in there. So there's one chunk that came out, and I kept gently tapping, wiggling a little bit, and gently tapping because I didn't want to damage the blades of the blower motor with forcing it if there was a piece of glass stuck inside. So the blower motor is not moving at all. So that explains why the projector would overheat. And there, another piece of glass fell out that was jammed in there, and now the blower motor moves freely. So those two pieces came out of the blower motor, and now the blower motor is able to freely move. So I'm going to clean out, use a brush and a shop vac to clean out the blower motor and make sure it's nice and clean. As long as I've got it out, might as well make sure it's nice and clean. So after cleaning, it looks a lot better. The shop vac and the brush worked really well to get all of that out. It moves very freely. If by chance your motor blows out, you could probably replace it for a lot less than sending it in for service. And there's the model number. But some big chunks of glass. Those chunks of glass were keeping the blower motor from working. So now here are the side fans that bring the air in and funnel it to the blower motor. These are also dirty, but with a little brush and a little shop vac can be cleaned up very nicely. So the nice thing about removing these and cleaning them outside of the projector is then you don't have to be blowing hard air inside the projector where you might mess up the alignment of your color wheel or other parts of the projector that are sensitive to the strong forces that might happen from using like a can of air or something on there. So I took the 3 fans out, cleaned them up, and put them back. And that's the orientation that it should go in. Big fan on the front, blows air out. The other 2, I believe, blow air in. And this one basically sucks the air that the blower motor blows over the bulb out the front of the projector. So it's looking pretty dirty as well. Now it's nice and clean. So at this point, all the repair and maintenance is done, and it's time to reassemble everything. That's all the glass and pieces that came out from inside the projector. It was the original bulb that came with the projector that blew up inside the projector and went everywhere. That's the, once I had swept everything into one place, that's everything that came out. Quite a bit of glass, and I had already cleaned the inside of the projector out 2 or 3 other times, trying to get it to work, but had never taken the blower motor out. And as we could see, that was where the problem was. A piece of glass had been wedged in there so that the blower motor could not turn. So now we got to put the blower motor back with its housing. Clean out a few additional bits of glass and debris. One thing you want to watch for when you're putting this back is to get the port tightly sealed with the blower motor so that you're not losing air. You need as much air as possible coming from the blower motor to blow through the port and over the bulb to keep it cool. We're going to get the blower motor screwed in tight, snap on the port. There's little clasps on the sides that hold it in place. With the blower motor in place, we can put the circuit board holder back in place. You want to make sure that it fits on all of the resting points, that it's not being held up by a cable underneath it, because then the circuit board's not going to fit properly. So there should be no gap between the circuit board holding structure and the base that it rests on. Now all the screws need to be put back. There's one screw that's slightly different, and it goes up at the very top. And then we'll put the rest of the screws back. All right, everything's screwed in place now. We've got the grounding cable on there. Need to make sure that the cable for the blower motor is fed through the right direction so it doesn't get pinched. So it feeds through right here. Probably would have been easier to put that in place before putting the circuit board holder on, but it's possible to do it afterwards. So there, I've got it fed through. It has a little guide that holds it in place. To get that cable properly run, then it won't get pinched by anything else that's coming in, any of the other parts. Now let's go ahead and put the circuit board back on. And now as we're putting it back on, it snaps down a little bit. So you've got to get the circuit board aligned with the pins underneath, because you don't want to break those pins. So make sure that that port and the pins both line up, and then you're going to press straight down, making sure that they are well aligned. Now you can start putting the screws back that hold the circuit board in place. There I'm showing you the correct screws to use in the correct spot. You can put on the side of the projector. slide down inside the grooves, and the bottom will snap in place. So now we're going to go through and make sure we connect everything that was connected before in the correct spots. Here I'm pointing out which cable goes where. All right, so these are all reconnected. I was able to put the cables that had, or the wires that had come out of their coupler. I used needle nose pliers to slide those back in and make sure that they were secure. And you want to leave the speaker cable disconnected until after you have put on the circuit board protecting cover. Make sure you don't pinch any cables when you put this on. It needs a few screws to hold it down. And don't forget to add the screws that go on the back in between the RCA and HDMI connections. The back cover of the projector needs to go on, so you can screw the screws through it and into the circuit board protector. So once that's snapped into place, then you can put the screws in. There's the RS-232 ports. Got to put those type of screws in the correct place. So if you forgot which ones, these are the correct screws. Now they're all in place. And the speaker cable goes through those little guides and snaps into the circuit board. And you're ready to screw down the circuit board protector from the top. Make sure when you screw it down that none of the cables are caught between a place where they shouldn't be. Now we're getting close to being done. So my cover did not have the proper insulation. It looked like one side had a piece of insulation, the other side didn't. So I just made some with some home insulation and some scissors, put it in place. We'll snap on the cover and then put the screws back. Remember, there's one inside where the housing is, and there's several underneath. Once those are all in place, we put the legs back on that will hold it to the ceiling mount. Almost done with the whole reassembly. So now the bulb, this is the new bulb. I bought the housing directly from BenQ. Make sure to snap down the housing. There's the screw that holds the whole bulb housing in place. That's snapped down tightly. Put the film that covers that, make sure to align it properly. Got a little messed up because glass pieces flew all over it, burnt a couple holes, so I just used some Scotch tape to patch it up. Got it all in place. There's one last cover that goes on, and a final screw to hold that cover. And there is the complete projector reassembled. And those were the pieces of glass that were holding the blower motor from working, and after testing, everything worked well. I hope you have success.